Thank you very much, Rachel, and welcome everyone to this evening's Open University webinar entitled Sharing the Pleasure, the Role of Talk in Reading. I'm Teresa Cremin. I'm a Professor of Education at the OU. I'm pretty passionate about reading for pleasure because to me it aligns very well with the social justice agenda. We know that if children are childhood readers, that changes their lives. So, I'm not on my own this evening, though. I'm delighted to be introducing you to the rest of the panel. And to kick off, I'd like to welcome Ben Harris, who's from Dunmow St Mary's in Essex, who's an Open University UK Literacy Association Teachers Reading Group leader in his area. He's involved in Twitter as One to Read. Many of you will know him from there. And he's one of the three musketeers who, during lockdown, worked together to produce some videos and resource to support talk in reading. We called it Book Chat, Reading with Your Child. You'll hear more about that later. Secondly, I'd like to introduce you to the third musketeer in this particular trio. I'm one of them alongside Alex Price, our colleague from Macmillan, and that is Rich Charlesworth, who's with us tonight, who's from Spring Hill School in London. He's the English lead there, and he's also a co-editor of the UKLA Journal's book review section. The journal's called Literacy, and he's co-editing that. He's an OURFP ambassador, and as I mentioned, a musketeer in the book chat work. Thirdly, I'd like to introduce you to Romina Atka, who's a librarian from Furze Academy, Primary Academy in Birmingham. She's a mum, very well known on Twitter as both a librarian and a mum, and brilliant at both, it seems, from all our conversations. I think you might hear more about her children later. And finally, I'd like to introduce you to Smriti Halls, who's a brilliant children's author. Many of you will know her work, particularly perhaps Rain Before Rainbows. That's her most recent publication, which was released ahead of time as an ebook by Walker and Save the Children, working in partnership to support children who are most affected by the pandemic. Smitty's published many other books, Elephant in the Kitchen, The Little Island, and the #1 bestseller in America, which is entitled, and I don't know it yet, which I jolly should do, but I don't, I Love You Night and Day. Smriti is also a patron of the School Library Association, and she's recently taken up her role as Book Trust's writer in residence. And in that role, she's encouraging us all to read together, to read aloud, and to bring books to life, which seems a great missive for kicking us off this evening. This evening, we're going to take it in turns to have a view about book talk and the role of that book talk. And then we're going to gather together as a panel. And I hope by then we might be able to see one another. All I can see is a notice. I can see a few of my colleagues now. Hooray! I could see a black screen and I was worried. And can I invite the colleagues who are visiting to perhaps turn off their videos, because that means for other people who are seeing, you can see our faces just that little bit bigger. And when we come to share books, it's going to be that bit easier for everybody to be able to see the books that we're promoting. But welcome to you. I'm delighted to see faces I recognise there. And that wasn't meant to be a rude comment, but simply just a way of being able to say you'll be able to hear and see the presenters more easily. So to turn to the first kind of, I'm going to say a few words as a starting welcome. I think all of us as educators, I'm an ex-teacher too, we know the role of talk in learning. We know it's plays a critical part as a tool for children's learning. And in relation to book talk, I suspect we also know that when children voice up about a book, when they voice their views, they listen to other people's views, they hear the teacher's views, and then they reconstruct their understanding by negotiating those views, repositioning those views. Why, then we can see some of the power of that talk in learning. Jimmy Britton used to say that that reading and writing float on a sea of talk. And I think that's a very powerful phrase. Certainly in the Teachers Readers research, which we undertook, a team of us at the OU and other universities summarised in this particular text, when we undertook that research, we found that book talk, the inside text talk and reader recommendations were really key as part of a reading for pleasure pedagogy. It made it an effective pedagogy if teachers gave space to talk, to hear, for children to share their views. at the beginning of the project, we kind of discerned that that talk in those classrooms was largely objective-led, assessment-led, and teacher-led. But over the year, that shifted quite significantly, and it became more learner-led, reader-led, more spontaneous, more informal, more of the kind of book leather reader to reader. So the talk about text and the talk about reading was child-led by the young people. Now that's important because an effective pedagogy is not just giving children space to have agency, it's making a difference. An effective pedagogy will be enabling them to develop that will to read, that desire to read, which international evidence shows very clearly will influence the skill. So their cognitive advancement as teenagers will be significantly improved if they develop that commitment to reading in childhood. They read frequently, they read widely, and they want to read. And talking about reading is a key part of that desire. It'll also, of course, impact on their social and emotional capacity to cope with life, particularly now, but it'll impact on the vocabulary, it'll impact on their understanding of the wider world. So we're not talking about talk here as a kind of extra bit of chat about stories because it's fun to talk. We're talking about talk as a tool to shift children's learning and their understanding on. And I think that's really important. And what we found in the research was that those children who were in classrooms where their teachers were avid readers themselves, where they had a wide knowledge of children's literature and where they were able to share that knowledge with others and were in fact a reading role model. By that, we found made the most difference. And so I'd like to introduce you now to Ben Harris, who is an arch teacher role model, in my view, who talks about text authentically with his young people, because he cares both about the stories and the non-fiction, but about the kids too. So Ben, do tell us what you want to say about talk and reading in your class and drawing on your experience, please.
Thank you, Teresa. First of all, I want to say how important, just to reiterate what Teresa was saying, how important book chat and talk is in any reading. I think as teachers, we can get very bogged down with the comprehension activities where children are perhaps writing their answers down, or there's silent reading. But that is something which needs to be in addition to a very wide amount of book talk that's going on across the whole curriculum. So talking about text in English, in reading lessons, but also in science and maths and all sorts of other subjects as well, where text is coming in. So I would really emphasize the importance of that whenever you're using text, there needs to be talk around it and discussion about what the text is saying. The most important book I think I've read in my teaching of English is the Aidan Chambers' Tell Me. And this book changed my whole view. I was already talking to children about their text in whole class situations. I've always read to the children. I've been teaching now for about 20 years. And every one of those days I've been having a reading aloud session in the classroom. And part of that session is a devoted bit of time. I've made time in that session, not just to read the book, but to talk about the story and to talk about what we've all made of it. Because I believe that when you're working with a class of children, you've got, perhaps 30, 32 children in front of you who are all very different to you as people. We're all unique, and we are just as unique as readers as well. So I'm fascinated to talk to children about what did they see when I read a certain bit, or what did they feel? What did they think? What connections do they have across the classroom? Who else thinks like you? And we were talking yesterday, just yesterday in my class, about the messages a particular class text had given us. And we were talking about 9 different possible messages. And through that, the children visibly saw who read like them in one way, about what message did they get from that book. And so that was wonderful, because I think that that's what children need in reading, is they need to understand they have a voice, they have an understanding to talk about a book, but they also need to understand that other people have a voice as well, and they have an understanding, and those things are equal and valued in the classroom. And other things I'd like to do, there's sort of, apart from story time, I might do things where in independent reading time that the children have every day, I might just sort of move around the classroom and listen in to the discussions that duos and trios are having about their book. And we're going to, talk a little bit later about the individual children, but just being able to hear what your class are enjoying and what they're not enjoying is great. And another one that I love to do is book blankets, where I'll put lots and lots of books out on the table, and the children will go around these books and they'll talk about them. What grabbed their attention? Which covers do they like? Which titles look exciting? And getting them to talk then in a relaxed, friendly way. And I'll talk with them as well, because I'm that reader model myself. So I will talk about the things that I like and dislike, and make those two things valid. I'll question. And most importantly, and I think we'll come back to this a bit later on as well, is I love to connect to a book. I love to see myself reflected, other people reflected in the books, and things that I have experienced reflected there too. So I cannot tell you how much book chat is part of my classroom all the way through the day.
So what you're saying, Ben, is that it's not just a kind of a block of time when we might have independent reading and then we chat afterwards. It's woven through. Is that what you're arguing?
It's woven through, yes. Whenever we're looking at text, we're talking about it. And it's not just, the traditional, did you, which words didn't you understand? Or, what was the character wearing when they went into the shop? Traditional comprehension style things, or vocabulary. It's more to do with the affective quality, I think, as much as it is about what they've understood from a text. I mean, don't get me wrong, the comprehension and the vocabulary are hugely important, but equally the affective quality, how it's affected the child reader.
So bringing their emotion to the text and allowing them that emotional response, and then sharing yours by the sound of it.
Absolutely. Yes.
Oh, thank you. Lovely. Can I turn now to Rich? I think he's going to take us into a little bit more of a focus on less of the whole class and more on small groups. But Rich, over to you, please.
Thank you, Teresa. I can't echo their comments enough. Just in terms of sort of small groups and one-to-one reading within classroom, that's the kind of opportunity that I really love. It allows you to get those relationships between the child, the text, and that adult, and that questioning nature that we're able to sort of discuss and move their thinking along, not just looking for skill of reading, but sort of, I think what we're advocating with book chat is this kind of the will, getting them wanting to read, wanting to sort of choose different books. And I think with our sort of book chat, it's quite transient in nature. It's quite sort of, you might sort of just stumble onto bits of conversation, as Ben was just talking about, but it really makes a difference. And I think for that, you really need to connect to each of the children. So for me, for example, even though I'm in isolation with my year sixes, I'm still developing that sort of those interests from home. So just today we had a sort of chat from Amar from Springwell School in year 6, and he's a big fan of animals. And knowing that he's been sharing that on Zoom, it's starting to look at other texts that tempt him as well. So for me, that book chat grows organically. So for something with animals, you might look at Nicola Davis's lovely picture book Lost, or perhaps you might look at something like poetry with Nosy Crow's Tiger Tiger, or even something like a magazine like National Geographic. And I think for me, when I was in early careers as a teacher, it was quite challenging to know where to go for those kind of things. And the community on Twitter has been fantastic to build up those recommendations. But I know the OU do these book leathers. And through Twitter, you get recommendations from people who are in sort of classrooms, in libraries, and it really widens your knowledge. And school surveys and doing reading surveys are helpful, but I think nothing beats that connection that you can have with a child. So during lockdown, myself, Teresa and Ben, no, it's already been mentioned, created a resource called Book Chat, Reading with Your Child. And ultimately that was to help and support parents at home, which in this sort of very sort of unusual time, were finding themselves sort of speaking to children about books. And we wanted to encourage that lovely sort of emotional and empathetic responses that we've heard Teresa and Ben talk about already. So we created, alongside the 3 videos, which looked at 3 wonderful books from Macmillan, we then sort of created a top tips. So we looked at each of the videos in turn, and then analysed, found down to the sort of nitty gritty, what made them sort of really good examples of talk, and what kind of things could we suggest to both sort of parents at home, but also educators in the field. So some of the top tips we came up with: watching and listening carefully. So not just sort of looking and sort of making sure that the child's reading each word, but that they're sort of, you're following their interests as they sort of go along the page. So I think of Ben's example with Fox's footprints as it's making its way towards the chicken coop. And then sort of with the house that once was, finding clues and letting the child explore and pore over the page, so that they're kind of investigating themselves and exploring the text, and talk will organically grow from that. This can then lead on to some pondering and wondering about, in this example, who might have lived in the house before. So the second sort of tip about wandering and connecting to your own lives, I thought Teresa did this incredibly well with The Same Inside, which linked in, there were poems in that anthology which had sort of links to lockdown, to sort of scoring goals within football, and allowing children to connect to their own lives and their parents' lives through book talk is fantastic. So for an example that I'm raring to use in class, I'd use something like Min Lee and Dan Santat's Drawn Together, which is a beautiful picture book about art and cross-generational relationships. And it's just exquisitely drawn, but it talks about language, which a lot of the children in our diverse community will really empathise with. And I think, just to share one sentence, it's: right when I gave up talking, my grandfather surprised me by revealing a world beyond words. And in a flash, we see each other for the first time. And a book like this allows children, sort of through that talk and that process of just talking about the book, it allows you to sort of make those connections. So using prompts like "I wonder if," or "does that remind you of your grandparents?" And I think within the school context, that can work just as well as at home. And then finally, for me, I think personal responses are key. So being able to show your emotions and discuss empathy. So I've got a pile of books, a bit like Ben's book blanket, all around me. You could have something like Katja Balin and Laura Carling's The Space We're In. You could talk about Max as a character and discuss the younger brother, or even the older brother in the family itself. Or you've got something like Matt Goodfellow's Carry Me Away. And with a poetry anthology, I thought it was really interesting because there's no pictures, but the conversations that you can get from something can be just as powerful. So in something like The Move, which is very short and sweet, it allows children to really understand and really talk about their feelings and emotions. So I'll just read this one very quickly. It's called The Move. On the day we finally left, when the new family's van arrived, I swallowed the sharpest of breaths, kissed each wall, and cried. And I think for that, it's so short and so sweet, but it sort of speaks to the heart. And I think that the book talks that we love in class, and the book talks that I love to sort of have with my children within class, have that sharing of feelings within that safe environment of school and at home. And it really builds on that empathy. So I think book chat for me is all about kind of that seed, planting the seed and growing organically, that chat that ultimately results in readers who we want to read. And sort of it's important to get that balance of skill and will, but we really want them to read so that they can succeed later in life.
Thanks, that's just so moving. I've just written it down: kissed each wall and cried. I remember when we left a village many years ago, about 15 years ago, I bought each of my closest friends a gerbera and went to each house. Couldn't knock on the door, just knocked on the door and had to drive away because I was so upset. Now, that's not the same, but what did it do? Never heard the poem, and it triggered a piece of response in my life, making connections that we do as adults to books, whether those are children's books and children do to children's books and adults' books and newspapers and nonfiction, is exactly where book talk comes in. And I hadn't even thought of that and didn't know you were going to read it. So it's not planned, folks. You can see me welling up a bit. Let's not go back to there. We'll move on. Thank you very much, Rich. Fascinating. If you're interested in the book chat videos, do follow them up. They're on the website, links to them anyway, at least. So my next guest tonight is Romina Aktar, who's a librarian mum. Romina, I'd be very interested to know what tips you have, both as a librarian, but as a mum. What do you feel we should be profiling in terms of book talk?
So I was just going to talk to you a little bit tonight about the sort of book chat we have in the library. So initially, when children first come into the library, and I started as a librarian 2 years back now, so this is my 3rd year as a librarian. And initially, it is finding out what your readers want. What have they read before? What are their interests? You need to know your children as readers. So we have that discussion of what books they've read before, what books that they're interested in, and then we try and find, first of all, similar books that they want. So initially the book that kept cropping up again and again was Narnia. A lot of children come, oh, I really enjoyed, with Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, and that was, Miss Jones read it to me, and it was just such a great book. And then it's all, what books can we have that are similar to that? And some of them aren't, the best readers, and they would struggle with a book like Narnia. So it's trying to find other books with a similar theme that they would enjoy. And like I say, you could only get that idea of what books that they want through that initial book chat. So it's important to know your children as readers. Also just their general interests as well, to know what they're interested in. So when you have a child who isn't interested in reading, what is it that they like? How are you going to tempt them into reading? I'll talk about my children a little bit as well. With I've got 4 very different children. So Zahid, my eldest, he's not very much interested in books, but I do know that he's got a passion for sports. So I can tempt him with books that are sports related, and then going to the non-fiction as well, and looking at biographies of footballers. We've got the great selection of football books at the moment for younger readers, which you can use to tempt children into reading. So that initial book chat is really important to find out what your children like and how you're going to tempt them into reading. And then when they return the books as well, I love to chat with the children when I know that we've got a good group of children in their library, and we sort of like get a bit of a hush whenever they start talking, because of the excitement that comes out. Oh, miss, I've just read The Ship of Shadows. I've had a girl return The Ship of Shadows today, and it was just so exciting. Oh, I can't believe the characters, and what book should I read next? And then it's finding another book that's going to keep that interest. And when you have those conversations in the library with the children, then you get other children interested as well, and it's that book chat. And what's really important is the peer-to-peer book chat as well, and encouraging that. At this time it's a bit difficult because we've got our bubbles, so we don't have the mixing of bubbles in the library, but last year it worked so well, because we had I've got a really good group in year 5 that have gone into year 6 now actually, and they would stand there and they would chat, and then I've just bought this book back, and someone else, oh, what's that book then that you bought back, and what's it about? And once you've got that peer-to-peer conversation going, then it just sort of grows itself, and then you have a really good group of children who are all wanting to borrow books, lend books to each other. We've had children that then come back and bring books from home to talk about. They've talked about their books, and then they bring books in and share with their peers in the library. That can only come from book chat. When we do it with the younger children, what I've started doing is using emojis, because I found a lot of the younger children weren't talking. So we got a display with emojis, and what I used was like the paddles with emoji faces on. And what they'll do is they'll point. Oh, this is how the book made me feel. Showing the a happy face. I thought, well, what do you mean by that? How did that make you feel happy? What part of that book made you feel happy? And then they'll talk about it. And as you were talking about I think it was Ben that was mentioned about the different feelings that children have from the stories. So we read Will and Nil in the library today with year 1. And then they picked up the paddles and chose, and they had completely different views on the story. And most of them were, oh, it was a funny story, I enjoyed it. But one boy picked up the sad paddle, and I said, well, what made you feel sad about the story? Well, Neil didn't get any food at the end of it. And then, they're seeing, and once you start at that early age, and they're seeing that there's different opinions, and there's no right or wrong answer, which is a key thing when we're having book chat. It's not, this is and it's not, we're not talking about phonics, we're not talking about the technicalities, we're talking about their opinions. And they're making connections as well. So this boy has a pet at home, which is why he felt sad, and he felt that connection with Neil, that, I don't want him to go hungry. So it's great having those conversations with those children. And it is quite difficult in the library, because we have obviously a much bigger selection of children, different age ranges when they're coming in at lunchtime and that. And it's hard as a librarian to try and pick up on all their interests, which is why it's really important for teachers to also know books and know what books that they can target to their children. But do make use of your librarian. If you've got a school librarian, make use of them and their knowledge, so that, if you're stuck for a book for a child and that child really well, go to your librarian and find out, what books are appropriate for them. going back to my children, what I wanted to say was, when we're trying to encourage adults and parents through workshops, or when you're having the parents meetings, it is important to let them know that we need to have reading as a relaxed time. And there is a time to teach them phonics, and there is a time to teach them to go through the technicalities for their homeworks, but there should be that set time where they are relaxing and reading. And what we talked about last night was how I can see the difference with my boys and my girls. So my two boys are older, and it's something that I've learned as well. But with my two younger girls, they've sort of dragged their dad into book talk as well. And their daughters have that sort of relationship with their dad, and they're able to do that. And where they have done that, I can see with my daughter now, she talks much more freely about books. And she's got the new Anjali Rao book at the moment, and she's come downstairs last night and she said, "Oh, you won't believe that this book's about a bully, and Hector said this, and he behaved like that." And you get that conversation, not just when you're sitting reading the book, but outside of reading time as well. And they make those connections with their life about children that they've seen, about themselves as well, when they're reading the books, and you'll get that book chat. But yeah, the key thing is, I think, to make sure that parents are also aware that it's a relaxed time. We need to have book chat with our children in a relaxed manner, making connections with what they know in life. So we're talking about key books that we use, key books that help develop book chat. So I'm thinking back to when they're younger, and it does need to start from when they're younger. It's the younger the better, because they get used to talking about books. So the Jill Murphy books, everyone will know a Jill Murphy book, whether it's Peace at Last or The Large Family, or the newest book that she's got here, Just One of Those Days. And when you look at the pictures, you automatically relate, whether it's elephants or whether it's a bear family, you can relate to them as a family, whether you've got siblings or not. You can see that, oh, mum gets like that, and there's days when mum's really tired and she's just had enough. And that book chat just develops when they can make a connection to their own life when they're reading, and when parents are reading with them as well.
Thank you. I mean, you were mentioning too about your husband and being kind of dragged in by the girls. Is he a keen reader?
My husband does not read at all. He'd get rid of my books in an instant. But the key thing with my husband as well is that he's not actually a fluent English speaker or reader, and that's another thing that we need to get across to parents, is that you can read and have book chat in your own language as well. And picture books are really easy to do that. I was going to show you Nothing But Trouble. So Nothing But Trouble is quite an old book. This is a very, very old book. It's in a right state, but it's a very well loved book. And if you look at the picture of, can't see it now, Maisie, when she's having breakfast in the morning, that's something you can talk about in any language. You don't need to always be able to read the words to have the book chat. And that's something I try to encourage parents whenever they say to me, what can I do? I don't speak English. My English isn't good enough, or my reading isn't good enough. Lost my train of thought now.
Yeah, it's interesting to think that we just need to be very conscious that many families are reading to their children and talking with their children, not in, they're not speaking English as a first language. So, we need to honour that and recognise it and allow them, to encourage them to communicate around all sorts of issues in that way.
We had a parent last year whose child was in reception, and she was saying she's just not a confident reader, and she doesn't want to do the wrong thing. And I tried to, and what we need to get across is that it's not a right and wrong, because here we're not looking at technicalities, and we're not asking them to teach the children reading per se. It's about having that book chat and making that connection with reading, so that they will then go on to love reading, and as they learn the technicalities, then they will continue to enjoy reading on their own as well.
Talking about it. Thank you. Yeah, I agree. I do think it's important to draw parents in. And Smitty, who's also a parent, will perhaps offer us some perspective there. But can I ask you to start, Smitty, with a sense of, as an author, how do you see the role of talk? Are you, when you're writing these books, are you kind of thinking, who's going to discuss this in a particular way? Or are you, as an author, thinking, oh, I'm trying to write the book, Teresa, I'm not trying to scope what people might have as conversations later? That's up to you, I'm sure. But over to you.
Thanks, Teresa. Absolutely. I'm really thinking about what my audience is going to feel, how they're going to respond to the book, and how they're going to talk about it. I'm primarily a picture book author, and that means that I am in the very privileged situation of writing what I think are the most valuable books and the most wonderful books, because they speak to everyone, all ages. There is no age demographic for this book. They are intended to be read by a dual audience from conception, and a good picture book will be able to engage both its child reader and its adult reader simultaneously and enrich them and nurture them equally, but possibly in different ways. And I take that responsibility as just a real a real honor to be part of that very special relationship of when a child and an adult are sharing a book. I don't take that lightly. And I think one thing when we talk about book talk or book chat, sometimes we're thinking all the time that it's the parent who is, or the teacher, the adult who is giving to the child. They're opening up the conversations, they're asking them questions, they want them to relate something to their own life. From my point of view, a lot of the time it's the parent or the adult who's in that relationship who's also learning something new or seeing something through new eyes. Reading with a child is an extraordinary experience, isn't it? Because they come to books with no agenda, no preconceived kind of formula of what they think about a topic or an issue, and they respond to it as they see it. And sometimes I think that's an incredibly disarming experience. So to be part of that as an author is a real privilege. It's so great to hear all four of you talk about book chat, because actually from our point of view as the writers of the books, what we want is for these books to be discussed and to be used as tools for children, and to know that brilliant librarians and brilliant teachers are discussing them, finding opportunities to draw them out. This is music to my ears. But I suppose I come at the whole idea of book talk from a slightly different angle. While I really want to encourage great reading and great literacy and great interaction with a book, I suppose a lot of the time with my writing, I'm wanting these books to be springboards for children to engage with larger issues, bigger issues that are in their lives, whether they are emotional ones, whether they are the big things that are going on in the world around. I want them to be a way of processing emotions and processing sort of what they feel about things. And I think books can be a great way into tricky topics or things that are actually really difficult for us to talk about, things that we see on the news. I mean, the year that we have had, that we've experienced as a country, has been incredible. If we go from last October to this October, we've had a general election, we've left the EU, we've had a national pandemic, we've seen race riots, we've seen everything this year, and our children have to process these things. Now, for me, books are the key. They are the way to without agenda, they are the way to open up discussions with little people about big things. And my job, I feel, is to translate some of those big, powerful issues into something that is as satisfying for the adult as it is for the child, but which can be understood and taken at many levels by its readership. I think, yes, I want us to have children who are great readers, but what I want more is that we have engaged young people, that we have well-balanced young people, children who are empathetic, children who are able to manage their emotions, who are emotionally intelligent as they grow older, and who actually have an interest in what's going on in the world around. So through narratives, through picture books, I'm trying to develop that confidence between parents and children to talk about some of those big things in the safe space of home, of school, of library, so that they can actually ask all the questions that they want to there, rather than, when they're a little bit older, when they're confronted by other sources of news, tabloid headlines and so on, things that are more sensationalist, things that are just more geared to ramp up the rhetoric. And I think I'm in just a very lucky position to be able to be creating books in that way. And I I work a lot with prisons, actually, where children are not with their parents, and I'm involved in that work partly because of the book you mentioned earlier in the States, which I found out was being used in a Texan prison with level 2 male offenders as a first step to them reconnecting with their children, with their families that they had completely lost touch with at home. And you realize that sometimes these picture books provide the language where language has run out, where situations are so broken and difficult that that actually it's very difficult to communicate anymore. And I love the idea that books are building that bridge in those really difficult situations between adults and children, and helping them to find a language with which to find each other again.
Thank you. That's really fascinating and interesting to hear kind of another perspective that isn't coming from an educator's spec, as it were, although as a mum, you are an educator implicitly, of course. So thank you very much, Smriti. Well, what we're going to do now is move to, some questions that have been sent in and some issues that have been tabled. And I'm going to jump in with the first one. Please, any of you jump in and build on anything that I'm putting on the table. First question that somebody sent to me was framed around this: thinking about children in school, do you think they've learnt to talk spontaneously about books and about reading? I mean, we don't always answer, they're not always answering children's questions, but do you think they have to learn to do it, or do they come in doing it? And of course, that's going to vary with different children. But if they do have to learn to do it, how do we foster that kind of, book blethering, as it were? It's maybe easy with a group of children who are really keen readers, who go to Rumena's library and who can chat about it. But what about those who are less keen, who are less engaged in reading? How do we build that along? So, Rich, can I ask you to kick us off on that? What would you do?
Yeah, I think it links in beautifully what me and Romina were saying about the idea of finding their connection, finding something that we can sort of share. So finding their interests and getting to know their reader identity. So I think it's something that all of us have mentioned about getting sort of the right book for the right child. And sometimes that's been a tough journey. It sort of might not happen the first book that you or the text that you provide the child with. But it's that thing, I think it's all about modeling as well, going back to that understanding of if a child comes in not sort of enthusiastic and not willing to share, it's about modeling that yourself. And I think that it's such an organic thing for me in my classroom, is that I just live and breathe books, as do all of us, lots of everyone in the sort of chat as well. And it's the idea that if we're living and breathing books, you can't help but it's contagious. It spreads, and I think that that's something that if you're sort of passionate about books and about literature and about talking about those tough themes, such as grief and loss, and sort of tougher topics like politics as well, it opens up those conversations. It opens up those avenues of thought and the children. And if they're not so confident themselves, it gives them that sort of self-belief that their views count.
Thank you. Ben, it looks like you're trying to jump in.
No, I was just going, I don't know, maybe the sofa. No, I was just going to say, I was thinking, I agree totally with what Rich is saying about the teacher. We have a privileged position to model that book talk to the children. But I was also thinking about what Romina said earlier about those paddles, because I think we've got to be quite careful as teachers that when children come up with something that is very much their own opinion, that they feel comfortable to share that. So when there's a class, when I was hearing what you were saying earlier, Romina, about the class all putting up, this is a funny book, and there's that one paddle. Well, good for that kid, who put that one paddle up and said, no, I think it's sad. And I think that as teachers, we've got to be really, really sensitive to that, so that the children don't feel that their voice has been squashed because the teacher, they respect the teacher, they want to please the teacher. Let's all agree with how the teacher's thinking about this, or playing guess what the teacher's got in their head sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So brilliant. I think that those paddle ideas, I'm going to make some of those tomorrow. I think that's a fantastic way of showing the children that they've got an individual response. And so that sort of thing, it's again, that peer-to-peer sort of work. You sort of want to step further and further back once they've learned it. But I do think you have to you do have to show that first. You do have to do that modelling yourself.
I was going to say it needs to start young as well, and if you've got a cohort of children coming through, it's much easier to work with them. So today, yesterday we had year 2 in, and I've worked with them since nursery, and it was really lovely to see a child who, when in nursery, wouldn't speak up. And she is an EAL child as well, so speak of a different language at home, so she wouldn't speak up and she didn't really have her voice heard in nursery, and now she's confident enough, so once we've read the story and she wants to voice her opinion, but then that's been modelled to her as well. So in the times that she's been in the library, that's been modelled to her. Now she feels that confidence to come up and speak to us about what her feelings were. And she stood up in front of the class and she told us that it was Ravi's Rule we read, Ravi's Rule by Tom Percival, and yeah, she was able to speak to us about, you know, her emotions, about how Ravi had felt and a time that she'd felt angry as well. So, you know, that sort of thing can only happen through I mean, it can happen without modelling for the children who are confident, but you know, we're trying to get to those children who aren't able to book chat.
I think too it might be important to model that we give up on books. That there are some books that don't suit us, that didn't work for me, and I'm giving up on it. And we don't want the children all to give up on the book they're on, but we do want them to be able to be discerning readers who can make a choice that this isn't something that I want to sustain reading. I'll find something better. I'll work with the teacher to do so.
Well, it's all in there. It's the dislikes bit, isn't it? It's the dislikes bit, and that's just as valid as the likes. But I think we sort of get a bit polite about that sometimes.
Yes, and we call it reading for pleasure, as if we have to like everything.
Yeah.
We don't like.
No.
We get irritated by The Guardian or whatever else it is. Let's move to thinking about book recommendations, because we promised colleagues that we'd bring some books, and I know you've all got piles of books around you. So, Rich, I'm going to pitch on you first. What two do you want to tell everybody they must get that prompt book talk?
Yeah, I've went specifically with the idea of books that I'd like to share that will generate that talk that I know will work well. So my first one is a beautiful one, lots of you will know it, called Maya and What Matters, and that's by Tinée Mortier and Katja Vermeer. And it's just such an exquisite, it's like a piece of art in terms of the illustrations, but I think that the story is so powerful as well. It deals with sort of, again, it links to sort of Dan Santat and the sort of Drawn Together book with the cross-generational relationship, and it's a beautiful one to discuss, but it also goes into quite tricky subjects, as Smitty was saying. It talks about grief and illness, and through picture and word together, I think it's the talk that sort of surrounds that book. It always sort of brings tears to my eyes. I've shared it with family members, old and young, and it's a beautiful book. And the other one, sort of, it taps perfectly into what Smitty was saying about the idea of talking about quite challenging concepts, and it's Fearless, and that's by Cataldo, and it's about the life of Daphne Caruana Galizia, who was a journalist in Malta, and she fought for what was right. She was killed, she was murdered, but the book itself, it doesn't shy away from sort of those tough situations, and I think sort of one of my most favourite spreads within this talks about the power of the media. And it says, Daphne was not afraid to uncover wrongdoing. That is what a good journalist does. She does not flinch, even when her enemy was powerful and mighty. And it's that idea that, like sort of the Hydra that's depicted with all these political figures, that's standing up for what is right. And I think that I'm such an advocate for not shying away from those tough conversations within class. So obviously deal with it sensitively, but you should feel open enough as an educator to have those discussions and to talk about quite challenging concepts before hopefully the child has to experience something like grief themselves. They can empathise and understand through a talk and sharing of literature.
Thanks, Rich. Great. Ben, one book because of time. Can you go for one?
Yeah, it's one that I would use across all the different year groups. But as Romina was saying, start them young. Although this has actually been taken out of one of my lads' trays this evening, so I've got to pop it back, and I teach year 6. So it's Choose Llamas. Now, if you want to get children talking, this is a great book. The first page alone. Are you ready to build your llama squad? There they are. Which llamas do you feel drawn to? There are no wrong answers. And I think that sort of sums up what we're saying with book chat. There are no wrong answers. You choose. Anyway, the pages carry on. So you've got which llama would you choose to dance with? you know. And which would
It
you go on?
reminds me of John Birmingham's Would You Rather?
Yes, it's another great one. Yes, and I think there's a choose sloths now as well. So if you don't like llamas, you can go for sloths.
Romina, your slot. Which one are you going to recommend?
There's so many books that I've got, and there's two I've got here. So You Choose, everyone will know. Most people will know You Choose. It's a great one for conversation. It's a great one for peer-to-peer conversation as well. So if you're, when they're sitting down, we have them in the library, and we do this with the when the older children are reading with the younger children. So they've got, you know, ideas from other people, from people in different classes, and they get lots of different ideas with that one. But I wanted to point out this book. This is Starburst. It's a beautiful book, and it's attracted a lot of attention because of the illustrations. So it's by Sharon King Chan. If you look, the illustrations are absolutely beautiful in this. Very attractive, and it attracts the children, but it reads like a fable. So this is sort of like a fable. We've got a story about a moon king who gives his daughter a starbird, but she wants freedom for the bird. And we had so much conversation. Sorry, I'm trying to get this in the camera. We had so much conversation from this book about the father-daughter relationship. Was it right to keep a pet? You know, is it right to keep animals trapped up in any form? So it's a beautiful book to get book chat with the children.
Great, thank you. Well, I'm going to turn now to Smriti because she may well want to recommend a book, but I believe she's also going to read a book to us, which is even more.
I am. I'm going to quickly recommend this one, which is, you know, Rich says he's not afraid to shy away from the big subjects. This one's right there, the little first moment of the night, which is really about, it's a fable about our current situation, both in this country, but also sort of globally. And it talks about some quite big issues, but it has, I hope, done it with humour. I hope there are moments where you can laugh, but there are some bits which aren't as, I mean, when I talk about layering in picture books, you know, and what you take, I'm going to read out one line. The next night, the geese called a meeting. Our island was once a green and pleasant land, they declared to the ducks. Now, that's not one of the main themes of the book, but it is absolutely there as that sort of hankering for a glorious past that we don't have. And when we're talking about our colonial past and how we're going to change our curriculum and so on in schools, I mean, that sentence right there is sort of what I grew up with in terms of how we talked about empire, how we talked about Britain's great and glorious past, and that's just one of the kind of subtexts in that book. But I hope I've done it with a bit of humour. But I am going to I'm going to talk about my most recent book, which is Rain Before Rainbows. I have it excitingly behind me. This book I wrote actually 4 years ago, The Life of a Picture Book. Getting it together, it takes a really, really long time from acquisition, and I wanted to create in it a space to talk about sad things, to talk about worry, to talk about grief and loss, and to give space for children to process that, and to say that that is a natural course. That throughout the book I use images from nature to talk about these sorts of things being part of a natural process. I wanted children to understand that sadness is part of our story, but it is not the whole story. And lots of things fed into it when I was writing it. I was writing really about personal experience and what various friends and family were going through. But I was also very aware at that time of the images we were seeing on our television of literal danger that people were running from, families torn apart through war, families trying to find a new home, families making dangerous journeys across mountains and across very stormy seas. But I wrote it in language that was metaphorical because I wanted this book to appeal to everybody. I wanted everyone to own the disappointment, the sadness that we all encounter, and for children to know that adults experience that too. Little did I know, of course, that there was a danger coming that would be universal, that we would all, as a nation, as a world, in this year, 2020, experience something that would completely shake the foundations of what we know. And I wrote in the introduction of the book a couple of lines about, you know, the fact that we've had to face difficulty and danger and do so separated from friends and loved ones. For some, the dragons we are dueling are fiercer than ever we could have dreamt. The road is unfamiliar and we may feel alone, but we are not. There may be rain, but there are rainbows. And I said that I hoped that the book would help us acknowledge deep loss while giving voice to our strength, our resilience, our determination to cross the stormy sea, and to remind us that we don't ever face our fears alone, so that we find the courage that we already have, but have sometimes lost sight of. And this book was coming, and the publishers and I and David Litchfield, the illustrator, had a conversation, and it was not due to be published until October, until now, this month. But we felt that the message of the book, what I've just spoken about, spoke so deeply into the moment that we were all feeling that we did something that authors and illustrators almost never do, which was give the rights for the book to be made available for free through Save the Children in partnership, to try to help people compute what was going on, to give a language, an emotional language, to navigate this very tricky time. And, you know, I wrote in the introduction that I wanted the promise of rainbows to breathe through every page of the book. And I think actually the response has been phenomenal. Save the Children say that I think the book was downloaded 50,000 times in the first 2 weeks. Famously, Stanley Tucci read it for them for their Save the Stories campaign. David and I have been inundated with responses from parents, librarians, teachers talking about how they've used it in class. I mean, it's humbling. It's a school song. It's been put to music. It's being used from reception and Key Stage 1 up to GCSE English. And I mean, that's something that we never expected. But it's a book that's been talked about, so I'm going to share it with you.
Thank you.
Rain Before Rainbows, written by me, Smriti Halls, with illustrations by David Litchfield. Rain before rainbows. Clouds before sun. Night before daybreak, the old day is done. There are mountains for climbing, journeys to make, dreams that are hopeful, decisions to make. Dark days may shake us and worries creep in, with dragons to duel and battles to win. Thunder will rumble and lightning will flash. The wind will start blowing and tall waves will crash. But there are footsteps to follow and words that are wise, a map that will guide us when troubles arise, friends who will help us, courageous and kind, a rope to hold on to, and treasure to find. Sowing and planting, roots before shoot, stem before flower, leaf before fruit, rain before rainbows, clouds before sun, night before daybreak, a new day's begun. A day full of promise, a day full of light. The morning is breaking, and the morning is bright.
Thank you so much. Has that kind of wonderful roundedness at the end that we're trying to hope for, aren't we? Making the new morning bright for all our young people by finding the rain, accepting the rain before rainbows, but then finding the courage to move on. Thank you so much, Smitty. That was really lovely. A treat for us all at the end of this evening. We've just a very few minutes left, and I was going to invite each panelist to say one very short recommendation, one very short top tip for teachers, including you, Smitty. I'm sure you have one that will support teachers as we move forward to try and encourage more book talk, and to recognise that, as you said, Smitty, book talk is for us all, for adults and for children, for teachers and for children, for parents and for children. It's not that we're joining in with the children's book talk, it's that we're readers, and readers talk about what they read and what they care about and what the world means to them, and try to understand it through that talk. So I'm going to go in the same order as we were before. Ben, over to you for one top tip that you'd like to leave us all with.
I think the recommendation is make time for it. Make time, and don't, plan for it. Don't plan what you're going to say, obviously, but plan that there's going to be 5 minutes at the end of story time to discuss, or when you're doing your DT work and you're following instructions, you're talking about those instructions, what isn't understood, what is understood, those sorts of things. So sew it all the way through and make time for it.
Thank you. Make time. Rich, over to you. What do you want to share?
For me, I think instead of one tip, it's 5, and we've got them on the Research Rich Pedagogy's website. So we've made those videos. They were primarily for parents, but I think they're really useful for teachers, especially if you're just starting out. They would have really helped me early on in my career. So the top tips are included on the Research Rich Pedagogy's website, which is in partnership with the OU. And there's loads of ideas for sort of developing that book talk and making that thing organic so that it just grows and grows.
Thanks, great. There are top tips. We're not going to read them. They come on the YouTube video, so you can't forget them if you try. They're redesigned into the process. Romina, over to you. What would you like to recommend?
I just want to recommend that we move away from the silent reading, because when we have silent reading, we're not giving the children that chance for book chat. And often when teachers bring their classes into the library, they'll say, oh, remember, it's a library, we don't talk, we need to be quiet. But that's not going to engage the children, and we're not going to get that book chat, and we're not going to get that, the children who love to read, we're not going to feel those sparks coming off and the rest of the children engaging then with them. So we need to make sure that it's not silent reading, it's quiet reading, but allow them to chat, allow them to talk about the books that they are reading. And just, in relation to parents as well, if you're going to do a parent workshop, do make sure that there's a parent workshop for reading for pleasure, and it's not always about phonics, because like I said, every parent workshop I've been to has always been linked to phonics or technicalities of reading.
Getting the balance between the will and the skill with parents as well as children, absolutely critical. Smriti, over to you.
I'm going to be a tiny bit cheeky and give 2, not as cheeky as Rich, obviously, who gave 5. My one thing is what Romina said about when you have parent workshops, there are often younger siblings at home, babies and toddlers. Start them young talking about books, because this is the perfect way of demystifying book talk. And you learn as a parent with a baby actually how to talk about books. Oh, look what's happening there, or touch the page or lift the flap. But my main tip is make connections. Please make connections when you're reading a book in class and you see a connection in the wider world, whether it's about the environment or planet or politics or what's happening in the news. Make those connections so it's not just abstract reading. It's something that they're going to take to be great people as they grow up, feel confident about themselves.
Thank you very much, and thank all of you for joining me tonight. Thank you, colleagues who've been listening in. I hope it's been of value and of interest to trigger some conversations in your classrooms. We will email out some of the links, but do check out, if you wish, the book chat resources which are on the OU website. We've made a good relationship with Marilyn Brocklehurst, who's a brilliant Norfolk Children's Book Centre, and she's making a great offer to colleagues who are here tonight. So that'll be in your email too afterwards for a reduction in buying any of the book chat books, or indeed getting Rain Before Rainbows. And then do join the RFP Book Blether in November. We're starting on Tuesdays, 8 till 9 in the evening, same sort of time as tonight. And we'll be blethering about books on Twitter and swapping good recommendations around that. And then on the 7th of November, we've got the Egmont OU and UKLA Reading for Pleasure Award ceremony, which is fantastic. Saturday morning, 11 to 11:45. Should have all happened at the March conference, but that wasn't possible. So we're being brave, Smitty, and putting a proper face to the world and saying, okay, we'll do it here. And we'll do it in November. That's on Eventbrite now, and we pushed out around tomorrow. So if you want to go and book, that's only 45 minutes, but it'll be lovely to celebrate, see some mini films from people who've won the awards and who are celebrating their rich practice. So I'd like to finish by saying thank you to everybody who's joined us. Thank you particularly to my colleagues at the OU behind the scenes. This is our first RFP webinar that we've led and run. It's been extremely challenging, and I don't know what, we haven't seen each 5 of each other. We seem to have seen lots of different small screens and goodness knows what, but that doesn't matter. What matters, we hope, is that you got something out of the evening We certainly did. I think it's really fascinating to talk to other people. I think it's really now time to either go and catch up with the Bake Off or to boil yourself a gin and tonic. And if it's a gin and tonic, Sir Tipple, you'll be joining me. So have a very good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us. I think we can all say goodbye because people will go.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.